Sharing the faith, the most important thing for a Christian. Wouldn't it be just nice to know how to do it well? So good evening, everyone. My name is Mauro, as Brandon said. To introduce myself, I am Italian from Rome. I'm sure you can pick it up. And I came to London 10 years ago to work in IT. And as time went by, I entered more and more into the young adults London Catholic circle. I made many friends. And eventually, I got the impression that God was calling me to remain here. So eventually, I decided to stay. Since the very beginning of my journey with Christ, 16 years ago, I felt the constant urge to share my faith with others, in whichever way I could. I remember how I wanted all my friends to come to a relationship with God. After all, I found the pearl of the highest value, so I wanted everyone to feel the same joy for it. So I was always on the lookout to invite people to this or that course about the faith. I was urging people to pray, to do spiritual reading, etc. And as I kept on doing so, sharing my faith basically, I experienced the joy of someone taking advantage basically of what I was saying. That was a joy to see. But inevitably, I also came to know the sheer pain and the frustration of being rejected in other occasions. I remember the endless and fruitless conversations with some colleagues at work about, some of the teachings of the church. Or other times I used to join these street evangelization initiatives, and again, many of those conversations simply went nowhere. But I did not stop. So I kept on sharing my faith as I could. And with hindsight, I would say that this has been a key factor in my spiritual growth. So through the years, I have put together a few tips about how to engage with evangelization. And finally, last year, I came to know Catholic Voices. So I went along to that training, and I was amazed to be given a complete, clear structure about how to share the faith. And I was pleased not only to see some of my own tips within their approach, but many more. So, and they were all organized in a nicely flowing, logical way. And as I said before, when I find a pearl of great value, I want to share it. That's why I'm delighted to be here with you tonight and speak about Catholic Voices. So in this talk, I will first explain why it is so difficult in our culture to share the faith. And then I will illustrate the Catholic Voices approach about it. And then I will share a few principles that can help us in those conversations with our friends at the coffee machine or at the restaurant. So let's start. At the heart of Catholic Voices' vision, there is one simple idea, that to communicate the church message, we cannot simply speak and expect to be understood in this present culture. The reason is because there are far too many filters that prevent it from happening. Now, these filters are a series of preconceptions or prejudices about the church, and in communication jargon, they are called frames. So in order to be heard, one must be able to steer the conversation outside of these frames that are present in our culture. This process is called reframing, and Catholic Voices teaches how to do so. So why are there such frames, negative frames, we should say, in our society's culture? I give you at least 3 reasons. First of all, the church as a human institution is a mixture of good and bad. I'm sure you know that. If you ask the faithful, on one side there will be some complaints or stories of inadequacy, reports about this or that fault, or disagreements or reservations about this or that teaching of the church. But on the other side, there will be many more positive reports about the church as a place of love and welcome, as a place of growth and healing, of wisdom, of support, both material and spiritual, etc. So reality is that in the church, the good does surpass the bad by far and large. But the human nature is such that people tend to take little notice of the good and remember and emphasize the bad. As the saying goes, a tree which falls makes more noise than a growing forest. Second, the church has perhaps been not too skilled in communicating her values, failing to display the good reasons behind what she teaches. So, too often, people got simply a series of rules and they didn't know the reason for them because they haven't been explained too well. And third reason, the contemporary Western secularized culture in which the church finds herself. So, scientific progress and rationalism have given the illusion of explaining everything, and wealth and technological advancement have created a false sense of security. So, the result of this has been the idea that there is no God to be accountable to, nor the need of one. So, because of the interplay of these three factors, the church is too often perceived as intolerant, judgmental, seeking her own interest, and not the people's interest. So a church that excludes and imposes her own values, tries to impose her views, whose message is a series of prohibitions, sins, faults, like a form of stoicism or self-denial, etc., etc. In short, the church is perceived too often as a no instead of a yes. So how do we go about it? Think of some of those discussions where perhaps you did try to defend the faith, the church's position, only to meet a wall of resistance from the other person. Is there anything we can do to replace walls with bridges? So, one aspect of the interaction between Catholics and the critics is that both parties are usually consciously or unconsciously appealing to a shared positive value, a shared positive moral value. But interestingly, in these discussions, which are animated quite often, each party assumes that the other is an enemy of that same value rather than a promoter of it. An example, let us think of, gay marriage, the topic of gay marriage. So the church can be charged of being bigot, intolerant by gay marriage supporters. They say that they promote the values of tolerance, fairness, and inclusion, but these are also the values that the church supports. So the dynamics of a conversation among people is often this. When we are challenged by those who we feel they do not share our same values, we tend to go into defensive mode immediately. And our mind works frantically to combat the other instead of analyzing, thinking more rationally about what's being said. Instead, if we are with people who we feel they share our same points of view, our same values, then we feel safe and we are much more open to be objective about what's being said and to find the truth in the argument of the other, even if they are contradicting us. In this case, a true dialogue can take place. So, having said that, the reframing method of Catholic Voices allows us to create that safe environment for both parties by making sure we affirm and speak to the positive moral value held by our critics, the one we share with them. So instead of going into defensive mode by simply reaffirming the Church's teaching, which is a great temptation, we look for the positive moral value that he or she is holding as we try to begin our response to them. So we begin our response by agreeing with that one value. So we basically discover that what we have in common and begin with that. Only later we broaden the discussion and we bring into the picture other elements that our critics have not considered and hopefully will make them think. So let us try to recap quickly this process, this reframing process. So basically, people have negative questions, negative point of views basically about the Church, criticisms. Instead of responding negatively, try to find the positive value or intention behind their stance. It could be tolerance, equality, and speak into that. Find common ground which creates an atmosphere of acceptance, and then broaden the discussion by introducing new elements to make the other person think. So this, in short, is the reframing process. It goes without saying that to be able to do something like that, we should be very well briefed on what the Church thinks and says, and we must be able to express it briefly and directly in those short conversations which happen at a bar or at a restaurant. Now, about those conversations. There are a few principles that can help us greatly when we engage with our friends or colleagues. So, I'll illustrate to you a few of them. The first principle, one of my favorite, is use illustrations. People prefer stories to lectures. So we should supplement our points with stories or examples from personal experience or hypothetical situations which can help people imagine or visualize what we are talking about. Example, one day, I was speaking about prayer with a friend. I wanted to explain how prayer, being a conversation with God, is greatly helped if we practice spiritual reading every day. Spiritual reading is the daily reading of the Bible and the saints, more or less. But having said that to my friend, I needed to explain in practical terms to him why spiritual reading is helpful for our prayer. So I used an illustration from my own life. I said that when I got my first job back in Rome in 1997, I was put in a room with my three more work colleagues. And they used to think all day long about football. I didn't have any interest about football. So quite often I was left out of their conversations, and that was frustrating. So one day I took a decision. From this day, I will read everything I can about football when I'm at home, whatever. And I did so for a time. And I remember the sheer joy as one day I was able to join their conversations with my thoughts, my contributions, my ideas, my statistics. They love statistics about football. So why am I saying that? Because I explained to my friend, prayer can work a bit in the same way. Why? You know what a main issue is with prayer, like meditation or mental prayer? An issue is dryness. Dryness is where you are there, you begin, you pray for 5 minutes, you talk with God about yourself, etc. And then you run out of arguments. You don't know what to say, you don't know how to pray, and that's dryness. And then you quit. But if we read every day the Bible and the saints, we learn about spiritual things, and this will give us, abundant material to fuel our conversations with God. And so the quality of our prayer greatly increases. So I said that to my friend, this illustration. And my friend replied to me that because of this that I said, he could see why spiritual reading was important, and he said he would try to engage with it daily. Yeah. Another principle, second principle, to illuminate in conversations. What does it mean? Many times we cannot expect to win a conversation on the spot, there and then. So, in the space of just a few minutes, our critics perhaps will not tell us, actually, you are right. I didn't think of it in all these years, but now I see clearly, thank you. It won't happen, unfortunately, too often like that. So, even so, we must expect to be able to illuminate them with something new, something that begins to make them think. So in other words, sometimes all we can do is planting a seed in their mind. So, and this is not a small thing at all, because hopefully it will be for them the beginning of a process which could then, later lead them to having a different picture about the topic. Our aim is to create understanding. Third principle, people remember how we made them feel more than anything else. Sometimes it might be easy to win a conversation and lose a person. Yeah? So the lucidity of our arguments is far from being all that is needed to have a fruitful conversation. So it is also very important how we make them feel as we engage with them, because they will remember that. So the best communication takes place when people feel valued, affirmed, when we establish an atmosphere of empathy. So basically, we must make the other feel uplifted and not battered, inspired and not hurried. And this creates a culture of encounter that makes it easy for the other to grasp the church's position. Fourth principle, remember to say yes. What does it mean? The church is indeed against many things, but only because she is for so many more. Centuries of reading scripture, prayer, and experience have made the church a sort of expert about humanity. So the church offers signposts which highlight wrong turns and dead ends, together with the way to a brighter horizon in the road to human flourishing. So the church basically says no to say yes to something better, something greater. So remember always to mention what we say yes to. Fifth and last principle, witness, if you can, as a contradiction to the current culture. A contradiction, what does it mean? People can be changed or converted when their prejudices come up against a reality that contradicts them rather than a theory. Such reality most likely is going to be a person. We must be that person. An example. Once I found myself in a discussion about chastity. So the issue was that, the church's position of not having premarital sexual relationships. So this man could not agree with this, nor could he believe that it was ordinarily possible to live in chastity for years until marriage or whatever. So instead of giving him a lecture on the sixth commandment, I gave him my personal witness about it. So basically, I told him the story of how I came to the faith. I said, 15 years ago, I had a personal experience of God through the church, And I wanted to give my life to Jesus, but my main problem, my main obstacle was the obedience to this chastity thing, this not having premarital sexual relationships. I could see that there was a higher beauty in keeping the total gift of myself for the woman I would eventually marry, but that was difficult, and so I couldn't do it. So I prayed, I earnestly prayed to God, Lord, I want to trust you on this, but I can't do it by myself. Lord, if you want me, will you help me? Will you help me in that? And then I explained how the Lord did help me, gave me the help, the grace, the power to basically be in control of this side of things. And so I came to the faith, to the fullness of the faith, etc. I then told this man how every year I celebrate with my friends my conversion on the day I embraced chastity. And I showed him 15 pictures from my laptop, one picture per year of those yearly celebrations. And in each picture, there was myself surrounded by my friends while I blow a candle on a cake, like in a birthday, basically. And he saw these pictures with me and my Christian friends who thought like me about chastity, and he couldn't believe it. We were radiating joy in these pictures. He couldn't believe it that was actually possible. And so the conversation ended, but later, basically, someone else told me how struck he was by my witness. So on that occasion, rather than giving a sermon, a theory, I witnessed with my own person as a contradiction to the dominant thought. I hope the example is clear. Okay. So these are some of my favorite, tips about how to do well in these conversations. There are more. You can find them in the Catholic Voices book if you want. Now, where are we? To do all that we've been saying, to witness our faith, we do need something that the Greeks called parousia, a Greek word, parousia. It is the courage, the apostolic courage of speaking out, to speak out. Parousia is the quality Pope Francis believes the Church needs in this age. You know, he has become one of the most talkative popes in recent times for a reason. There is a lot of pressure to say less, a lot of pressure to the Church to say less. Instead, parousia is about finding our voice and using it in the office, at the bar, at the restaurants, with friends, at dinner parties, etc. So that was, in short, the Catholic Voices model to empower the faithful to share the faith. I want to finish by making one last example, again from personal experience, which I believe it shows the quality of the Catholic Voices model. Question for you. Which one is the most, which is one of the most, I should say, successful Christian stories of our times in terms of evangelization? Well, certainly one of them is the famous Alpha Course, of which I am a big fan, and I believe some of you here know it because you are attending it right now, some of you. Now, Alpha began in London with just a few people 25 years ago, and during these years, Alpha has experienced a steady exponential worldwide growth. It spread to 5 continents, 160 countries, and it has been received by more than 20 million people. They did that, the Alpha people did that, in this same hostile culture that we've been speaking about. How did they manage to do it? You know, the Alpha Course, as you know, is based on small groups where Christians meet non-Christians. And the Alpha recipe happens, actually, to contain many of the Catholic Voices principles that we listed earlier, or that are in the book. And I believe this is a tremendous confirmation for the goodness of the Catholic Voices model. the leaders of an Alpha course are trained to apply these principles, and some of these are. I'm sure you will recognize them. Avoiding confrontations with the guests while seeking common ground, in the small group discussion. Avoiding giving Christian sermons during the small group discussion, but sometimes just aiming at planting a seed. Remember, to illuminate. Using illustrations or stories when conveying a message. The Alpha teachings are full of them. Creating an atmosphere of acceptance which makes it easier for people to open up. You can say what you want in an Alpha small group. Witnessing by showing compassion, personal pastoral care towards the guests. And basing everything on prayer, as everything depends on God, ultimately. Just to name a few principles. So I come to the end. If you had a good time, if you're having a good time, at Alpha, and you feel the desire to share your faith, Catholic Voices will give you the tools to do that. You see, normally, if we have a certain good, and we want more of this good, what do? Normally, we keep it for ourselves while trying to acquire more of it. Well, with faith, the opposite, it's true. We grow our faith as we share it. We grow our faith as we pass it on to others. So, sharing the faith is worthwhile. It is not scary and brings great joy, and it can be done in a civil way. Ultimately, sharing the faith means to be a true follower of Jesus Christ. God bless you.